Maybe this is heaven. Good night, Ray. Good night, John. Hey, Dad? You want to have a catch?
I'd like that.
Dwier Brown had always wanted to be in a meaningful film, just like Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life. Now, Stewart used that entire movie to warm the hearts of audiences. In Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner, Amy Madigan, James Earl Jones, Burt Lancaster, Timothy Busfield, Ray Liotta, Gabby Hoffman, and cast, they all set up Dwier's impactful moment. But once he appears, the impact needs just a few seconds to take effect. He didn't realize the magnitude of this scene until after the movie wrapped. In his book, he talked about getting encouraged to go to a screening and just watch the audience when he appears on screen. So one day, he spontaneously did just that. He pulled up to a theater, paid admission to get into the movie even though it was almost over, but he walked in just in time to see his scene and the wave of emotion that filled the room. Little did he know, that was only the beginning. In his book, If You Build It, a book about fathers, fate, and Field of Dreams, he recounts some of the complete strangers that have approached him about playing John Kinsella and shared stories about when they saw the movie and what it means to them. It's truly an example of the power of film and the opportunity of a lifetime. As a fan of the movie and the book, it's my pleasure to welcome Dwier Brown to Talking with Hollywood. Dwier, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for being here.
Good to be here, Scott.
Well, I have to say, there is a really sweet and meaningful way that you've intertwined these stories in the book, from your own family life to events on the set and all the people that approached you and shared their stories after the movie was released. When did it hit you that this would make a really good book, and what was it like piecing all of that together?
Well, I guess that I had always wanted to write a book. I mean, I never knew sort of when I was going to do that or what it was going to be about. But when I realized the 25th anniversary of Field of Dreams was coming up, I thought, they always tell you write what you know. And I realized that how many people had come up to me and told me just unbelievable stories about how that movie changed their lives or how much it meant to them. And I thought, well, that's a story I can tell that, there's not too many other people can tell. At the time, I sort of assumed that it happened to James Earl and Kevin and, Phil Robinson. I assumed everybody sort of had people come up to them. And anyway, so I started writing those stories, and then that got me thinking about my dad, who died just before the movie was filmed, and that was unexpected and kind of, really changed my experience of the movie. And then, that sort of just brought on the next thing, and I just sort of kept writing and writing and writing. I tried to write everything I knew, everything I could remember about baseball and everything else. And so it was pretty interesting. And then the hard part was sort of trying to figure out how to intertwine those stories together in a way that, made sense and was compelling, got people to read on to the next page. So it was a very slow and not very conscious process that I went through. It just, one thing led to the next.
Well, I love how you did it because, the thing is, I'm one of those people that I have to get hooked on a book early for me to even get through the first chapter. So I've gone through the whole book, I've read the whole book, and I'm also a very visual person as I read. We're talking about movies. I'm one of those people that when I read a book, it's almost like the film is playing in my head or the story's playing in my head. So the really cool flow of how you'll be in one aspect of what's happening on the set, and then and then flash. Here's another guy coming up to you to tell you how the movie impacted him or his relationship with his father, and it made it for a very compelling book. I love how you did it.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. I like reading. I like reading books like that. So, but it's harder to do than I imagined. You see somebody who does that well, or you're reading a book and you don't realize the kind of thought it goes. I mean, I had a lot of different incarnations of the book where I was using the names of these people that had come up to me, it's interesting how you just sort of pare things down and try to make it, more clear and kind of keep a little mystery going so that people are compelled to read on to the next page. And it's an interesting process.
Yeah, and when it comes to some of the things that you share about, showing up on the set and, the anticipation and everything you had to do, I think that's valuable too, because as audiences, sometimes we don't always think about just how much effort goes into make, a story come to life on screen. And one of the things that stands out for me is what it must have been like to be Don Lansing, who lived on the property and let this film crew come in and make these changes to the house and the field and bring this whole movie set on the place in which he lived.
Yeah, to me, there's a whole other book there. That's sort of the one I really sort of intended to write, because I think Don Lansing, in a funny way, has lived Ray Kinsella's dream. And unfortunately, without the movie magic and the way, movies can kind of just give you a sketch and you fill in the rest, he's the one that's had to actually, he had to deal with his baseball, that baseball field being on his neighbor's property as well. And
yeah.
The discourse those two had to go through. He had to deal with licensing rights with Universal Studios. Here's this farmer who, was just innocently growing his corn. And I mean, this wonderful thing happened to him, but it wasn't all wonderful. There was a lot of responsibility that came with that movie. And I was very impressed over the years how well he undertook that responsibility. I think he really felt very much like the caretaker of this, national treasure, and that's a lot of responsibility. It's not just like, oh, what a lucky guy, he gets to collect money from people. And
right.
The fact that for the last 25 years that nobody's ever charged anybody to go to that field, to me, is mind-boggling. Particularly when the movie and the book both say that that's what you're supposed to do. That the farmer charges, people pass over the money. It's money they have and peace they lack. And for neither one of the farmers, Al Amescamp or Don Lansing, to charge people for people to come to that field, because people would most definitely come.
Yeah, right.
James Earl says they would come anyway. To me, it was a real testament to what good, sweet men both of them were, that they allowed people to come there and walk all over their valuable agricultural property and just never bothered charging them for it. I mean, they could have charged $1 and they both would have been millionaires.
Sure, absolutely.
And yeah, that was always in the back of my mind, and I found that story sort of hard to tell without, there's just so many difficult aspects of it that I realized it's sort of a separate book, and I might leave that to somebody else to write.
No, I hear you. Yeah, it is quite remarkable that all that time that people can still just walk up and visit the land without admission charge.
Yeah.
And one of the big challenges that I didn't realize when it came to putting all that together was making that cornfield have corn stalks big enough and bright enough to walk through the way they needed you to.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody thought of that. I mean, what if the corn doesn't grow? That was just I'm sure that, obviously the executive producer thought through it enough to have insured the corn, to make sure that, if they didn't have the corn that was absolutely necessary to shoot this particular story, they would have a chance to grow it. And nobody knew that drought was going to affect the corn so dramatically. I mean, it was the worst drought in 62 years. There was no way to anticipate it. And it is pretty amazing how much, there's people who say that great art is made out of adversity and difficulty. And one could certainly argue that this movie fits in that category with all the daily setbacks they had and had to manage to overcome. It was pretty remarkable.
It's common with any production. There's always going to be those things, and it was pretty amazing. The plan B. What I always think of that's what you have to be prepared for is the plan B, and how they bring in some bigger stalks and had to use paint and everything they possibly could to make that work. Yeah. Plan B and then Plan C. I mean, I think the watering the corn ended up working, but they had ordered these silk corn stalks from Korea, 60,000 of them, that they were going to somehow build this cornfield with. Which, I mean, it's just funny to imagine the movie that could have been made and how bad and underproduced it could have been if they hadn't managed to succeed so brilliantly in overcoming these things. I mean, even that Robin Williams was potentially going to play Ray Kinsella, and that Jim Carrey could easily have played John Kinsella. That would have been a very interesting family dynamic with those two, and what a different movie it would have been. I visualize that being a very different movie, to say the least.
Yeah.
I have to think it's still surreal to you that you're in the movie, proving that, I remember when I was working on some productions, there was always, there's no such thing as the small part. And, here we are, you're in this movie for 3 to 4 minutes, and I have to think it's still pretty surreal to you that it is the scene that everyone remembers and gets arguably the most emotional about.
Yeah, it continues to amaze me. I mean, even when we were shooting it, I didn't really think of it as a big, sort of pivotal part. To me, it was just the last 5 minutes. I had done kind of a lot of small roles and things, and this felt like just another one. I mean, I loved the script, and I loved the story. I'd read the book a couple years prior to auditioning for it, but it wasn't until the cast and crew screening, that was the first look at the movie that all of us had, that I realized how pivotal and how iconic that meeting at the end was, and I attribute a lot of it to James Horner's, kind of brilliant score. I think that starts with those low rumbles, and then by the time it gets to the end, it's like a freight train, and all of that is leading towards me, and there's me on that screen taking my catcher's mask off, and I mean, I always think of it as that, that Kevin and James Earl and James Horner and Phil Robinson did the hard work of opening up the audience's heart, and then I just sort of take off my catcher's mask and walk right in, because I'm sure many, many, many actors could have played that role. I'm very happy that I got the part, and I have learned to be appreciative that I think I did a good job with it. I think there's certain aspects of my personality that made me well suited to play that part, but I know enough about Hollywood to know that the right actor doesn't always get the part, and that sometimes you get lucky and you get in a part that's going to be remembered, and that's just sheer luck, I think.
No, I definitely think that you are an ideal fit for it, and I think that's one of the reasons why people are impacted the way they are. And we know that you're seen as one that makes men who might think they're not supposed to cry, kind of break down and potentially even provide healing for maybe some father-son relationships. And based on the stories you tell in the book, it looks like it kind of breaks down to, maybe even a couple of moments in that scene. You were talking about how Kevin Costner and James Earl Jones and Amy Madigan and all them kind of set everything up. I mean, it might start from the moment where we see Ray talking about, the regret he has, and then when he plays catch with you, people may see that their father, who has perhaps passed on, or perhaps if the relationship is strained or they haven't talked in a while, they just kind of want to break through some of those negative barriers to have a moment like that with their father.
Yeah, it was, when I was thinking about doing this, I ended up looking at the movie more critically than I had in the past, and it is pretty hard to take out, and this is the moment of that film. That one of the things about that movie I'd always thought is that it's very cumulative. You end up, the more you go along with Ray on his journey of building the field, and, once you sort of commit to that and make that believable in your mind, you end up really going along for the ride that he takes with Terrence Mann. He's trying to solve the mystery of why he built the field and all this stuff, and the more you commit to it, the more it pays off at the end when, the father appears that nobody's expecting, and so it really blindsides the audience the way it blindsides, the character Ray Kinsella, and I think it's to the credit of Phil Robinson to have made such a fantastic idea of someone plowing under their corn, and that baseball players would come out of the cornfields, to make that plausible enough that at the end, you are totally with them, I think is great filmmaking. I mean, and I don't want to undercut the fact that, Bill Kinsella wrote a fantastic novel that was really, really just a mind-bogglingly interesting concept. And even the fact that, I auditioned for the role and got the part, and then, my father died unexpectedly before we shot it, and the fact that 25 years would pass and then I would decide to write this book, there's so many kind of impossible serendipitous coincidences that it's hard to imagine that there's not some larger hand, guiding it, and the movie continues to amaze and entertain me when people come up to me and tell me how their life was just like Ray Kinsella's or just like mine, or how this movie had kind of impacted them. It's a gift that keeps on giving, I guess.
Yes, definitely. And in the book, there are just so many different people that had so many different stories about how it impacted them and their life with their father. And, kind of to your point, I mean, that especially has to be one of the best examples of just the power of film, how it can not only reflect but impact people's lives in a really unique and powerful way.
Yeah, I think I sort of got in the movie business for that reason. I just thought, wow, what a great medium, that could really be used to, illuminate our lives, and it's so infrequently does it actually do that. We end up watching, a lot of cop shows and reality shows, and that I think aspire or end up creating the lowest common denominator rather than the highest. So I think that's why, for me, that movie is so fond in my memory, is that it really aspired to a higher order and in fact achieved it. And the most telling evidence of that is the number of people who've just told me these incredible stories of how just a movie that somebody just came out of somebody's brain and out of the sweat of shooting it literally changed their lives in a profound way is really has really been rewarding for me.
Yeah, I found it also interesting that a couple of times, and I'm sure this happened on more than just even the times mentioned in the book, that some people thought they were just going in to see a, quote, baseball movie. And realized it was something more than that.
Right. I think in particular it was the early audiences, before people started talking about what the movie was about. The people who came in there just thought, oh, this is another Kevin Costner baseball movie like Bull Durham. And
right.
I think because that journey is told so well and so kind of inconspicuously in a way, the story itself is so unbelievable. You really invest in it, and then for that to have the emotional payoff at the end that it had is such a sneaky little trick on Phil's part, and it is really pretty amazing. And I think they did a great job of disguising it as if it's a baseball movie.
I'm sure that there was probably a process where you had to kind of decide what stories, that, as far as people coming up and talking to you about it, were going to make the book and which ones couldn't. I mean, is there a story that you remember that really had an impact on you that you weren't able to tell in the book?
Well, I tried obviously to put the most impactful ones in there and the ones that had the most variety of results. I guess the one I've heard most is just that, I know Phil and some other people have also heard their versions of people who's had a estrangement with their father, for many years, and then were brought back together because of the movie, and that one seems to have happened over and over again. So, if I had to put one story in there, that would have been the one. But the one that I don't know, just always kind of amazed me was the one I talk about, where the guy sort of changed his career based on that movie, just because that seems like such a strange manifestation of an emotional reaction to a film.
That was the guy that was going to be a lawyer, right, for his
right.
His dad.
He became a lawyer sort of because his father had died, and he wanted to, show the spirit of his father that he loved him by being the lawyer that he had been, and even though he sort of hated being a lawyer,
Yeah.
but he was doing it for his father, and then, seeing the movie helped him realize, to show his love for him, but to be happy in whatever he was. Thought that was such a profound but obtuse, way to take the magic of the movie and apply it to your life. That one really I remember for many years.
Yeah, and I remember that when all was said and done in the book, you talked about how Kevin Costner said that you could potentially be right where he was as an actor in 4 or 5 years after Field of Dreams. And, there are a variety of reasons, as you say, that, didn't necessarily work out that way. But is it fair to say that actors could have a really big, successful career and never do a movie that impacts people the way Field of Dreams did? And getting that opportunity might even be better or even more rewarding than just big stardom?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, it's hard to sort of explain that to people, but there are so many fine actors who've done amazing jobs, sometimes in movies that just didn't take off for no good reason, or sometimes movies that, didn't end up being that good. But for me to have done as many little parts as I've done, and for one of them to have had this kind of effect is pretty amazing.
You just recently returned to the farm and the field to celebrate the 25th anniversary. What are some of the most meaningful highlights of that day, and did it feel like it had been 25 years?
Well, I was really surprised how little it felt like 25 years had passed. It was hard to describe, but my best shot at it is that it sort of felt like we all walked into the corn at the end of the game for the day, the way the players do, and that we came out the next day and there everybody was again. I mean, there were so many cameras there and media. It felt like a movie set. You know, there were tents set up and people were serving lunch and, you know, all the kind of things that happen on movie sets. And all the people that were involved with the shooting, there's all the local people who had been extras in the movie, and Kevin's there and Timothy Busfield's there and I'm there. And it really felt like nothing had changed, that the 25 years hadn't passed and we were all just there for the next day of shooting. That was a pretty profound experience to sort of just be back. And we had a great baseball game. I was on a team with Kevin Costner and Brett Saberhagen and Bob Costas, and so we got to have a great game. I made a kind of a really good catch that everybody was very impressed with, sort of a running, diving catch. That was a nice moment because I was pretty worried that I was just going to strike out and, you know, make a fool of myself. But last time I was there for a celebrity game was 23 years ago, and I was batting against Bob Gibson, who you know was obviously retired, but was still enough of a competitor that he just whiffed me. You know, I just whiffed twice with him, and so it was great. I got some hits, and another thing that I know for some reason I just got such a kick out of. They had an announcer there announcing the game, but in the later innings, Bob Costas left our team and went up and announced the rest of the game. It was just so amazing to be standing on that field, hearing Bob Costas' voice, you know, introducing you as, you know, coming to the plate and all that kind of stuff. That was kind of a real treat that, you know, everybody should have Bob Costas announce their Little League game or something.
Yeah, it's like people who say that, you know, how great would it be to, I mean, when you talk about how great it is to hear Bob Costas do that and how everybody should have that, you know, maybe it's just like having Morgan Freeman kind of narrate your life. It should take place every day.
Yeah, right, yeah. If everybody could be March of the Penguins.
Yeah, right. Well, and I know that you filmed your scene with your father's baseball glove and you brought it with you to the reunion. Before then, how many times had you brought it out, and where does it kind of stay when you're not using it?
Well, I have my dad's mitt out in the house all the time. I try to kind of keep it as a little touchstone for me. There's two ways to be with something like that. I mean, the mitt itself I don't think is anything like a serious collector's item, but you know, it's meaningful to me. But I take it around because I think my dad would have preferred to have people, you know, trying on the mitt and you know, wearing it. And to me, it's like it's a small way that, you know, my dad can touch these people who, you know, since he didn't live to sort of see the movie or you know, see its effect or, you know, read this book that I sort of wrote as a tribute to him. Mm-hmm. This way, you know, his mitt can kind of touch people in that same way. So, but yeah, it's just I try not to be too precious with it, and I do sort of have to restring. I notice some of the leather from people wearing it has the laces is worn through, and some of the little stuffing is showing. So I'm going to have to stitch it back up, and I think my dad would appreciate that too. That he taught me well enough that I can fix a 1920s split finger baseball glove. So
no, absolutely. Well, you know, you have a lot to be proud of when it comes to your scene in the film, but what are some of your personal other favorite moments from the movie?
Well, you know, that's kind of interesting because I have so many of them. You know, I have the same reaction that many people tell me about, is that when that movie's on, you know, you happen to walk through a room or something like that. It's really one of those movies that's pretty hard to walk back out of the room, you know. No matter where it is, you kind of find yourself sitting down, or particularly if it's the final scene, you just watch it. You know, it's just very hard to kind of just walk out of the room when something like that is playing. But there's several things. My wife and I say to each other, as Amy Madigan says to Ray when he's talking about, wow, this field, it's I've done something completely illogical, and she says, that's what I like about it. So that's something that we say whenever we have a little something that's an appropriate sentiment for. And you know, we have this other thing where, you know, when Ray's throwing the ball to Ray Liotta the first time, and he says, I am pitching to shoeless Joe Jackson. That's also kind of it's a very iconic sort of feeling that you have when you're kind of doing something that's just so ridiculous and out of your realm of reality that it's, you know, it's worth saying that too. I completely love when Timothy Busfield walks right in front of that pitch in the movie, and I just, every time I see it, people keep asking me, was that done with CGI and all that? Well, I mean, CGI wasn't happening in 1988, and
Right.
he had to commit to walking in front of that pitch, and it just gets me every time because it just looks like so close. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it really makes you kind of gasp as he does it, and it comes at a perfect moment when he's coming in to be the bad guy. His performance as the sort of comic, bad guy in the movie is really, I think underappreciated. So I love when James Earl Jones reaches into the corn, and just as he walks off, he does that giggle that
Oh, yes.
his voice. So, I mean, to have Darth Vader giggling, I guess, really sums it up. I mean, that voice of his is so powerful, but the playful, boyish way in which he sticks his hand into the corn and then, kind of shuffles in, is kind of laughing is, I mean, to me, that's something that wasn't in the script, and to me it says so much about, sort of about heaven, because we think of when the players go into the field, what is that? What is that, like a purgatory or a place where everybody goes? And
Yeah.
for him to have characterized it as something that would make you giggle, to me, is profound and says something about what a wonderful man he is and his, view of humanity and life. So that's another moment I like. Those are the ones I can think of offhand.
I love all the scenes that James Earl Jones is involved in, and he's got some great humor in that, too. I love it when Kevin's about to drive off. He's dropped Terrence off, or dropped James Earl Jones off, and then he makes that quick turn, and then there he is standing in front of the car, and that's when he says,
Right.
Moonlight Graham, and he saw it. And Ray says, okay, well, what are we supposed to do when we get there? And he's like, how the hell am I supposed to know that?
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
It's really fun with that kind of classic music playing in the background when that baseball game's going on. Something that I find myself quoting a lot and talking about a lot in the movie is the winking at the pitcher, and
Right.
and then after he comes back and says, okay, well, where's the next pitch going to go? And he's like, well, either low and away or in my ear. And he goes, well, look for low and away, but watch out for in your ear.
Yeah. There's some really, really great moments. I love all those too. And Art LaFleur, talking about how good he looks after being dead for 65
Yeah.
years, and then casually mention, you got a cigarette?
Yeah,
it's
right.
like, I mean, it's just so funny and so well played.
That big speech by James Earl Jones, the baseball speech, is so profound, and I want to say that at one point in time, that's the sort of thing you think may not. I think you said in the book that you might think that that's something that takes so much screen time, you wonder if it would even make the film, and the fact is, it made it. That's another one of those just moments that you remember, and of course, here of all people, you have James Earl Jones who's doing that speech, and you can't help but pay attention to it.
Yeah, just amazing. And I'm sure James was sure it was going to be cut too.
And of course, can't go without mentioning the great Burt Lancaster, who is a real gem in that movie as Moonlight Graham, and I think that was his last movie, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he ended up at the time. He actually left our set to go to shoot a film in Italy. It's his last American movie, and I mean, it is a great tribute to him because he's. Somebody was mentioning at the field this past time, I think Bob Costas maybe was talking about how, Burt Lancaster was a real athlete. He had a basketball scholarship to NYU and ended up, going there for a year and then quitting and starting an acrobat troupe. I mean, he was a serious athlete, and it lended credibility, I think, to the story to have someone who's such an athlete play that part, because you could sense that there was an agility and a kind of virility to that role, and for Burt Lancaster at his age to still kind of give that feeling, I think is a credit to him.
Your book title includes the words, a book about fathers, fate, and Field of Dreams. And when I think about your father's story and then yours, and you have two people that are basically taking their personal experiences and translating that into a better life for their kids. In your father's case, he had a reason for keeping everyone together, but internalizing some emotions, everything from anger to love. But acting kind of helped you realize maybe some of the toll that took on for you over time, but you were able to come back and infuse some of that into your family and then get a better understanding for the reason for why certain things happen. And I think now, I'm assuming that you've been able to take that and, in your own way, transfer all those experiences in your personal experience into raising your own kids.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that's true. What's so interesting about parenting, I think, is that you try to fix the things that you didn't like about your being raised, and at the same time you try to keep the aspects of your childhood that you were fond of and pass them on to the next generation. And it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you take for granted the things that you got, like, the fact that I had to work so hard as a kid on the farm I was on. I of course I hated that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I wanted to be playing and doing other things, but as I get older, I realize that, in a lot of ways it contributed to my ability to be able to sit down at 3 a.m. every morning and write a book. That kind of tenacious, drive you have to take something from start to finish was, I'm sure, influenced by the fact that, I was digging a basement for 15 years under my house. And, and those are the kind of things that it's hard to. I don't have my kids digging a basement. You know what I mean? I don't even have a basement I could have them dig,
right.
But at the same time, how do you give your kids that experience or that sort of feeling of accomplishment and, kind of putting aside your own dreams in order to make a greater good for the whole family, without kind of putting them through unnecessary trauma, So to me, that's kind of one of the difficult aspects of where do you give your kids everything you always wanted, but at the same time make them work for it so that they appreciate it the way you would have. It's a funny dichotomy that you sort of have to walk, and I think nobody's ever going to do it perfectly. There's
Sure.
going to be, you're going to make your progress, and then hopefully your kids will make their progress back, and it's a kind of a, it's like most of life. It's just, it's a constant changing ball game, and you just do the best you can.
No, absolutely. And, it was really engaging and great to see how over time you really grew to learn and understand more and more about your father over time, and you highlight that really well in the book. And as we mentioned, the movie just celebrated 25 years. Have you, in that time between now and when the movie was complete, did you realize anything new or get even a better understanding of something about him in the time between now and then?
Well, what was surprising to me is when I undertook this book, I thought I'd sort of made my peace with my father's memory. I was aware of a lot of things that I had healed, and through therapy and acting classes and everything else, I felt like I'd really plumbed the depths of that relationship and made my peace with it. And it was only from writing the book that I just got a whole different level of it, which surprised me. It was a good thing, that, I think was sure that I had gotten everything I can out of that relationship and appreciated my father fully. But when I started putting the story together and sort of saw how many coincidences brought me to that role in the movie, and saw how my dad's life had brought him to raise me the way he did, it kind of put it even in a larger context than what I had been seeing it in, and really helped me realize that there's a certain level maybe that I was meant to play that part in the movie. Even the fact that I would have thought to write a book about it 25 years later. I mean, I think I sort of hoped that Kevin Costner would write a book about it, or Phil Robinson would tell his story, and that I could read it, because I'm as interested in the movie as many of the fans.
Sure.
But it fell down onto my shoulders, or I took it on in any case. And, so the movie, even the book itself was, you could make an argument that I was the guy to play that part just because I was the guy willing to write a book about it 5 years later. So it continues to surprise and, amaze me that the movie continues to have an effect in my life, even though, I thought my healing my relationship with my father was one of the profound effects. It continues to have profound effects in other ways.
And it's interesting because I know my father's dad wasn't one for a lot of emotion, saying I love you, that sort of thing. And I know he's done a really good job of being the opposite. And I have a good relationship with him, and yet I have to say the movie and your scene still gets to me. So another example of just the power of that scene really being able to have an impact on everybody.
Yeah, I think no matter how your relationship was with your dad, whether it was good or bad, any of us would love to have another moment, to make it good or make it better or make it longer,
Yeah.
That's what I think is so great about the movie, is it gets everybody, the people who got along great with their dad and the people who, struggled or had no relationship with him at all.
Yeah, and obviously if you love Field of Dreams, you have to read the book, and as we've demonstrated here today, there are so many other good reasons to read it, because it's a book also about fathers, sons, family, relationships, and connections to people and the power of film. It's a very good read, and I definitely want fans and sons and daughters and people to read it, so let everyone know how they can get it, or the best way that they can get your book.
It's available on my website, DwierBrown.com. It's DWIER Brown. And you can get copies of it there, and I also have, I can send you an autographed copy if you write to me at that address. And it's also available on Amazon. We've submitted it for, Barnes & Noble and some of the bookstores, but so far they haven't picked up. So if you go to your bookstore, tell them you want If You Build It, and maybe they'll get it there and make it easier for everybody to get it. But Amazon or at DwierBrown.com.
Perfect. Well, Dwier, I was really thrilled when I found out we were going to get a chance to talk, and it's been great spending time today talking about the movie and honoring your father and Fathers Everywhere. Thank you so much for being in the film, for writing this book, and sharing your stories with us today on Talking with Hollywood.
Well, thank you, Scott. I can't take too much credit for having been in the film, but I did write this book, and I'm proud of it, so thank you for talking about it with me.